I've decided to start a new life without you." The words hung heavy in the air of the upscale Augusta restaurant, a stark contrast to the celebratory atmosphere surrounding my daughter Amelia's college graduation. Arthur, my husband of 28 years, stood with his champagne glass still raised his announcement, a jarring interruption of the toast he should have been delivering. The clinking of silverware ceased. Conversations died abruptly mid-sentence. 50 pairs of eyes darted nervously between Arthur and me, anticipating the tears, the shouting, the dramatic exit everyone seemed to expect. Instead, I smiled, a serene counterpoint to the tension gripping the room. "Congratulations on your honesty," I replied, my voice calm and steady. "My name is Beatrice Caldwell. I am 54 years old, and until this moment I had maintained the flawless facade of the devoted wife and mother. I had meticulously put my own career aspirations on hold, supporting Arthur through 3 failed business ventures, 2 abrupt career changes, and countless periods of self-discovery, each one more dramatic than the last. I raised our brilliant daughter Amelia, who sat beside me, her graduation cap still perched precariously on her head, her expression a frozen mask of horror. From the corner of my eye, I saw Eleanor Wells Arthur's considerably younger girlfriend, shifting uncomfortably at a back table. She sat surrounded by people I'd considered close friends for decades. Friends who it turned out knew about the affair, but had chosen silence. A silence that felt like a profound betrayal. Eleanor, the same Eleanor who had attended our Christmas parties, who had once sought my career advice, now sat complicit in Arthur's deception. With practiced composure, I reached into my handbag and produced a sealed cream-colored envelope. I placed it delicately beside Arthur's plate. "What's this?" he asked, his triumphant expression crumbling under the weight of my unexpected calm. "Something for you to read later," I responded, maintaining the even tone of my voice, a subtle power play in the face of his stunned silence. I turned my attention to Amelia, whose face had paled, her youthful optimism momentarily shattered by her father's shocking declaration. I kissed her cheek, offering a silent promise of unwavering support. "I am so proud of you, sweetheart. This day is still about your accomplishment," I reassured her, my voice filled with a gentle strength that belied the turmoil within. Then I rose gracefully, smoothed my dress, and addressed our stunned guests. "Please enjoy your meal. I wish you all a lovely afternoon." With that, I exited the restaurant, my head held high, acutely aware of the 50 pairs of eyes following my departure. The heavy restaurant door swung shut behind me, effectively silencing the anxious murmurs that had begun to ripple through the room. The Augusta summer heat, typically oppressive, enveloped me as I stepped outside. Yet for the first time in years, I welcomed its intensity, a tangible symbol of my newfound freedom. I could breathe freely, unburdened by the weight of years of suppressed emotions and unspoken resentments. Behind me, I heard the restaurant door open and slam shut, followed by Arthur's voice, no longer confident but high-pitched and frantic. "Bianca, what the hell is this? What have you done?" I continued walking, allowing myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The envelope I'd left contained the first volley in my meticulously planned revenge, a strategy I'd been crafting for months, fueled by a quiet fury and a determination to reclaim my life. Throughout our 28-year marriage, I had consistently been the practical one, the stabilizing force in the midst of Arthur's grand dreams and impulsive risk-taking. I had maintained the financial stability our family needed, diligently saving for Amelia's education, while Arthur made unwise investments like his ill-fated venture into his friend's failing restaurant. I had worked extra hours as a finance manager at Truvanta Corp., balancing his midlife crisis and his fleeting passion for handcrafted furniture, a passion that burned brightly for approximately 6 months before he grew bored, leaving me to blank's fervent. Pick up the pieces. My own aspirations opening a financial consultancy for women remained perpetually on hold. After Amelia graduates, I had told myself, after Arthur finds stability. 3 months prior, I noticed subtle discrepancies in our joint accounts, small, almost insignificant transfers to an unfamiliar account. Having managed our family finances for 2 decades, these irregularities stood out like glaring red flags. I could have confronted Arthur immediately, but a certain hesitancy held me back. Perhaps it was intuition or the growing emotional distance that had characterized our relationship over the past year. Instead, I chose a different approach, a quiet, methodical investigation. What I uncovered was far more insidious than I had ever imagined. Arthur had been systematically siphoning funds into a separate account for over a year. He had been showering Eleanor with extravagant gifts, expensive restaurants, lavish jewelry, and the exploration of beachfront property, all while assuring me that we needed to tighten our belts for retirement, a blatant hypocrisy that stung deeply. Then came the text messages, a digital trail of his deceit. I discovered them when Arthur carelessly left his phone unlocked. The messages detailed their plans for a future together, a future that excluded me. He spoke of finally breaking free of a new life with Eleanor, and most damningly of their plans for the day after Amelia's graduation, the very day he had chosen to publicly announce his abandonment of our marriage. What Arthur had seemingly forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood, was that I had been a financial professional for 30 years. I understood the intricate dance of money, the subtle trails that betray hidden transactions. I knew how to trace assets with precision, and most importantly, I remembered the prenuptial agreement we had signed 28 years ago, when my family's financial standing exceeded his. An agreement he had insisted upon, ironically, to protect his future earnings contained a fidelity clause that would become his undoing. While Arthur plotted his escape with Eleanor, I was meticulously building my case. I consulted with top attorneys, meticulously documenting every hidden transfer, gathering irrefutable evidence of their affair. I prepared the divorce papers, timing everything with surgical precision, knowing Arthur would likely wait until after Amelia's graduation to avoid ruining her special day. What he didn't anticipate was that I would file the divorce papers the very morning of the graduation before his planned announcement, though they would remain safely hidden in court records for the time being, ensuring my strategic advantage. What Arthur didn't know was that I was always 3 steps ahead, anticipating his every move. I didn't return to the restaurant. Instead, I drove home to our spacious colonial in Augusta's historic district, a house we had purchased 15 years ago. A house Arthur had already promised to Eleanor, a detail revealed in the text messages he hadn't realized I had seen. I parked in the driveway, calmly entering the house that had been our shared sanctuary for over a decade. Everything appeared the same: the familiar family photos, the antique grandfather clock that had belonged to my father, the worn leather couch where Arthur and I had once envisioned our future together. Yet everything had fundamentally changed. I ascended the stairs to the master bedroom and opened the closet. Arthur's clothing was already packed into suitcases tucked away in the back, ready for his planned departure the following day. I smiled, a quiet acknowledgement of his predictability. He had always been meticulous about his clothing, yet remarkably careless about the things that truly mattered. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends at the restaurant, from Amelia, even from Arthur's sister Deborah, who had flown in for the graduation. I responded only to my daughter, offering reassurance and deflecting her concerns. "I'm okay. This isn't your burden to carry. Enjoy your graduation day. We'll talk tonight. I love you." I had shielded Amelia from the truth for months, unwilling to taint her final semester with family drama. She would undoubtedly be angry that I hadn't confided in her, but I knew she would understand eventually. Amelia possessed a combination of my practicality and her father's charisma, a potent mix that had propelled her to graduate with honors. 3 hours later, I heard Arthur's car pull into the driveway. The front door slammed open. "Bianca," he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. "Where are you?" I was sitting in the living room, calmly reviewing documents on my laptop. I closed it as he stormed in, his face flushed with anger, the envelope clutched tightly in his hand. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, waving the papers. "You served me with divorce papers today, of all days." "I thought it aligned nicely with your plans," I replied calmly. "You wanted to start your new life. I'm simply helping facilitate the transition." "You had no right to," he roared. "I had every right," I interrupted, my voice unwavering. "Just as you had every right to choose Eleanor. The prenup expired years ago," he stated, his voice suddenly laced with smug confidence. "Any lawyer will tell you that." I allowed myself a small, knowing smile. Actually, it didn't. Section 12 specifically states that the fidelity clause remains in effect for the duration of the marriage. Your lawyer should have explained that to you. Oh wait, you didn't consult one, did you? The color drained from his face as the full weight of his actions and their consequences settled upon him. The prenuptial agreement he had insisted upon to protect his potential wealth would now cost him everything: the house, the vacation property in Savannah, his share of our retirement accounts. His grand gesture at the restaurant had just become the most expensive mistake of his life. You can't do this to me, Arthur said, collapsing onto the couch, his bravado dissolving into despair. We built this life together. And you chose to end it, I replied, though not in the way you planned. Arthur's phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He glanced at it, then ignored it. Cassandra no doubt wondering about his whereabouts and the delay in their carefully orchestrated plan. You've always been calculating, Bianca. But this is cold, he said, attempting a different tactic. What about our history? 28 years together means nothing. I studied him, this man I had loved for nearly 3 decades. The man who had held my hand through 2 miscarriages. The man who had once surprised me with a weekend trip to Charleston for our 10th anniversary. When had he changed? Or had he always been this person, and I had been too devoted to notice? Our history meant everything to me. I answered truthfully. That's why your betrayal hurt so deeply. His expression softened momentarily, perhaps sensing a potential opening. Then maybe we can fix this. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake, Arthur. This was a calculated plan spanning more than a year. You systematically moved our money. You looked at property with her. You planned to announce our separation publicly to humiliate me. His face hardened again. You're exaggerating, am I? I picked up my phone, opened the recording app, and played back his own voice, his words, a damning indictment of his actions. After the graduation, I'll tell her it's over. A public setting is better. She won't make a scene in front of everyone. Then Eleanor's voice, equally incriminating. And she has no idea about the money. Arthur's voice again. None. Bianca trusts me completely. That's her weakness. The blood drained from his face. You recorded our conversations. That's illegal, he exclaimed, his voice strained. Not in Georgia. When one party consents, I responded, and not when it's in your own home. I didn't record your private moments with Eleanor. I'm not cruel, just the conversations about your plans to defraud me. Arthur stood abruptly, agitated. I need to make some calls. Of course, I said. Your attorney might be a good start. I'll be staying at Deborah's tonight. Deborah's, he stammered. My sister's house, I nodded. She's quite upset with you, actually. She was the one who first spotted you and Eleanor together last Christmas. She didn't tell me immediately. She confronted you first. You promised her it was nothing, that you would end it. When she realized you hadn't, she came to me. This was yet another blow he hadn't foreseen. Deborah and I had always been close, but Arthur had never imagined his own sister would choose my side. Everyone's betraying me, he muttered, his voice laced with bitterness. Ironic, isn't it? I gathered my purse and a small overnight bag I had packed earlier. You have until tomorrow evening to remove your things from the house. After that, the locks will be changed. As I headed toward the door, Arthur called after me, desperation coloring his voice. What about Amelia? Have you thought about how this affects her? I paused, anger finally breaching the surface of my carefully controlled composure. Don't you dare use our daughter as a shield, Arthur. You certainly weren't thinking about her when you were planning your new beachfront life with Eleanor. His phone buzzed again. This time he looked at it and groaned. Problem, I asked. Eleanor is at the apartment already. She's moved her things in. I couldn't help but smile. The apartment you put in both your names. The lease you signed last month. Arthur nodded, looking utterly bewildered. You might want to check with the leasing office. That application was flagged for credit issues and never completed. The agent called our home phone to verify information. I handled it myself. I walked out the door, leaving Arthur to grapple with the initial repercussions of his actions. His meticulously planned new life was unraveling at an alarming rate. Deborah lived in a charming bungalow across town near the university where she taught literature. When I arrived, she greeted me with a fierce, comforting hug. "I just heard from Amelia," she said, pulling me inside. "Are you okay? I'm better than I expected." I admitted, following her to the kitchen where a bottle of wine was already open. "I never thought Arthur would make such a spectacle," Deborah said, pouring 2 glasses. "The restaurant in front of everyone, he's lost his mind." "It was meant to humiliate me," I explained, accepting the glass. "A public rejection, so I couldn't fight back without looking hysterical." Deborah's face hardened. "My brother always did have a flair for drama, but this is beyond anything I expected from him." We settled into her sunroom, a haven of potted plants and bookshelves. Deborah had never married, choosing independence and her academic pursuits. Over the years, I had sometimes envied her freedom. "What did you put in that envelope that made him so upset?" she asked. I explained the contents, the divorce filing, the evidence of his financial deception, and most importantly, the prenuptial agreement that would leave him with far less than he had anticipated. "The prenup," Deborah mused, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I remember when he insisted on it. Father had just given him that money for his first business, and he was so worried about protecting it." She laughed bitterly. "The irony is delicious." My phone rang. Amelia. I took a deep breath before answering. "Mom," she said immediately, her voice strained. "I'm coming over to Aunt Deborah's." "Honey, you don't have to. I'm already on my way," she interrupted. "Dad is telling everyone you've lost your mind, that you've been planning this for months. He's saying horrible things." "Of course he was," I said. "Arthur always rewrites narratives to cast himself as the victim. Let him talk. The truth will become clear soon enough." 20 minutes later, Amelia arrived, still in her graduation dress, but with her makeup smudged from crying. She fell into my arms, seeking the comfort she had found there as a child. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I didn't want to ruin your final semester," I explained. "You worked so hard for this day," she pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Well, Dad took care of ruining it anyway." We moved to Deborah's living room, where Amelia finally received the full account of Arthur's betrayals. "I knew something was off with Dad," Amelia admitted. "He's been different, distracted, always on his phone, but I never imagined." "None of us want to see these things in people we love," Deborah said gently. My phone buzzed with a text message from William Anderson, my attorney. The emergency filing had been approved. The accounts I had identified were frozen pending the divorce proceedings. Arthur now had limited access to funds, enough for living expenses, but not enough to pursue the property purchases he had planned with Eleanor. I showed the message to Deborah and Amelia. "Good," Amelia said firmly. "He deserves it." My daughter's loyalty warmed me, but I wasn't naive. "He's still your father," I reminded her. "Your relationship with him is separate from what's happening between us." Amelia shook her head. "Maybe someday, but right now I can't even look at him. He hugged me this morning and told me how proud he was, all while planning to blow up our family." Hours later, the doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Deborah answered it, returning moments later with a troubled expression. "It's Arthur," she said, "and he's not alone." I steeled myself as Deborah ushered Arthur and Eleanor into the living room. Eleanor looked distinctly uncomfortable, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She was 37. Not exactly a trophy wife, but still 17 years, my junior, possessing the air of someone who had never faced real hardship. Arthur, by contrast, looked furious. His earlier desperation had hardened into simmering anger. "Bianca, you need to stop this insanity," he demanded. "Unfreeze the accounts. We can discuss this like reasonable adults." Amelia stood up, positioning herself subtly in front of me, a protective barrier. "Maybe you should have tried being reasonable before announcing to everyone that you were leaving, Mom." Arthur's eyes widened, as if only now registering Amelia's presence. "This doesn't involve you." "Doesn't involve me," she echoed incredulously. "You blew up our family on my graduation day, and it doesn't involve me." Eleanor touched Arthur's arm. "Greg, maybe we should go." He shook her off. "No, I'm not leaving until Bianca agrees to be rational about this." Deborah folded her arms. "My sister-in-law seems to be the only rational person in this scenario. You're the one who created this mess, Arthur." I remained seated, calmly observing the unfolding drama. For years I had been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over conflicts and maintained a semblance of harmony. That role had been exhausting, and I had finally relinquished it. "The accounts will remain frozen until the preliminary hearing," I said calmly. "That's in 3 days. The judge will determine appropriate asset division at that time." 3 days, Arthur sputtered. "What am I supposed to do for 3 days? You have your personal account," I reminded him. "The one you've been funneling money into for the past year. That should be sufficient." Eleanor's head snapped towards Arthur. "You have a separate account." With how much in it? An intriguing dynamic was emerging. It was clear that Arthur hadn't been entirely truthful with Eleanor either. Arthur ignored her question. "This is vindictive, Bianca. This isn't like you." "Perhaps you never really knew me," I replied, "just as I apparently never really knew you." Amelia turned to Eleanor. "Did you know he was going to announce it like that at my graduation celebration?" Eleanor had the grace to look ashamed. I thought he was going to talk to your mother privately. The announcement today was unexpected." Arthur shot her a look of betrayal. Cracks were already appearing in their previously united front. "I think you both should leave," Deborah said firmly. "You've upset Amelia enough for one day." "Amelia," Arthur pleaded, "you understand that relationships change, don't you? Sometimes people grow apart." My daughter's face hardened in a way I had never seen before. "What I understand is that you're a coward who couldn't even give Mom the dignity of a private conversation. What I understand is that you were stealing from our family while I was working 2 jobs to help pay for my textbooks because you said money was tight." Arthur paled. "That's not how it was." "It's exactly how it was," Amelia cut him off, her voice unwavering. "Please leave, Dad. I can't look at you right now." The silence that followed was profound, heavy with unspoken accusations and simmering resentments. Finally, Arthur turned to leave Eleanor trailing behind him. At the door, he paused and looked back at me. "This isn't over, Bianca. I'll fight you on this." I met his gaze steadily. "You're welcome to try." After they left, Amelia collapsed next to me on the sofa, tears streaming down her face. "I've never talked to Dad like that." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. Sometimes standing up for what's right is painful. Deborah brought us fresh glasses of wine. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. Indeed, I thought. This ending was just the beginning of something new. The preliminary hearing took place in a small courtroom on a rainy Tuesday morning. I arrived with my attorney, William, while Arthur appeared with a hastily retained lawyer, a young associate from a firm specializing in corporate law, not family matters. Arthur's poor choice of representation was yet another consequence of his hasty planning. The judge, an older woman with discerning eyes and a distinct lack of patience for theatrics, reviewed the prenuptial agreement carefully. "This document appears to be in order," she said, glancing over her reading glasses at Arthur's attorney. "Do you contest its validity?" The young lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we believe the agreement has expired due to the length of time that has passed. Section 18 clearly states that the duration is for the term of the marriage plus any legal proceedings resulting from its dissolution," the judge read aloud. "There is no expiration date indicated." Arthur leaned forward to whisper urgently to his lawyer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Furthermore, the judge continued, "The evidence of systematic fund transfers appears to violate the financial disclosure requirements in Section 23. She shuffled through the papers, then looked up. "I am ruling to maintain the freeze on joint accounts pending full financial discovery. Mr. Caldwell's personal account will remain accessible to him. The family home will remain in Mrs. Caldwell's possession during proceedings as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause." Arthur's face flushed a deep crimson. "This is outrageous," he muttered loud enough for me to hear. The judge fixed him with a stern look. "Mr. Caldwell, I suggest you review the agreement you signed more carefully. This court will reconvene in 30 days for the full hearing after discovery is complete." As we left the courtroom, Arthur caught up to me in the hallway. "Bianca, please, we need to talk about this reasonably. 28 years together has to count for something." "It counted for everything," I replied, "until you decided it didn't." I walked away, leaving him standing alone in the courthouse corridor, the full weight of his choices finally beginning to sink in. Word of our separation spread rapidly through our social circle. Friends called daily, some offering support, others seeking juicy details. I maintained a dignified silence about the specifics, simply stating, "Arthur and I are separating. These things happen." Meanwhile, Arthur's carefully constructed image was crumbling. The facade he had cultivated, successful businessman, devoted family man, was irreparably damaged. The financial freeze prevented him from fulfilling his promises to Eleanor. The beachfront property they had planned to purchase fell through. The luxury car he had put a deposit on had to be canceled. 2 weeks after the hearing, Deborah called me, her voice tinged with amusement. "Have you heard the latest? Eleanor moved out already?" I wasn't entirely surprised, but the speed of her departure was impressive. Apparently she had discovered that Arthur's business wasn't as prosperous as he had claimed. The substantial savings he had boasted about were non-existent. She confided in her friend Jennifer that she wasn't interested in dating a man with financial problems. I couldn't help but laugh. He had always been adept at creating illusions. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding my life, securing my future. The financial security I had always maintained separate from our joint accounts gave me a freedom Arthur hadn't anticipated. I rented a small office space downtown and began setting up the consultancy I had dreamed about for years. My first clients were 2 women navigating their own divorces. Word of mouth brought more. I specialized in helping women understand their finances during major life transitions, divorces, widowhood, career changes. The work was instantly rewarding in a way my corporate job never had been. Amelia, who had accepted a position with a marketing firm in Charleston, called me regularly. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," she told me, after I described my burgeoning client list. "You're helping people during their worst moments." "I'm just doing what I wish someone had done for me earlier," I replied, "preparing women for whatever might come. Being valued for my expertise rather than my caregiving was a novel and empowering experience." The final divorce hearing fell on what would have been our 29th anniversary, a fitting conclusion to a chapter of my life that had spanned nearly 3 decades. Arthur arrived looking haggard. I later learned that his business was struggling without my financial support and guidance. Eleanor was long gone already, pursuing a new relationship with a real estate developer. He was a developer from Savannah, Georgia, and most of our mutual friends had cut ties with him after the full extent of his deceit came to light. The judge ruled completely in my favor, upholding the prenuptial agreement in its entirety. Arthur left the courtroom with only his personal belongings, his failing business, and the money in his private account, barely enough to afford a small apartment after paying his lawyer's fees. I kept our home, my retirement savings, and 70% of our joint investments, precisely as the prenuptial agreement dictated in cases of infidelity. It was a perfectly poetic form of justice. The very document Arthur had insisted on to protect himself ultimately became his undoing. As we exited the courthouse, Arthur approached me for one last time. "I made a terrible mistake," he said softly. "Is there any chance we could—" "No," I interrupted, my tone gentle yet firm. "That chapter is closed." "I understand," he replied, and for the first time in years I believed him. "I hope you find happiness, Bianca. You deserve it." It was perhaps the first truly honest thing he'd said to me in years. 6 months later, my consultancy, Caldwell Financial Transitions, was flourishing. I'd expanded from a small office to a larger space and hired 2 associates. I specialized in helping women achieve financial security, particularly navigating the complexities of significant life transitions. Amelia visited frequently, beaming with pride at my accomplishments. "You know what's ironic," she remarked during one such visit. "If Dad had just been honest from the start, he might have kept half of everything." "Sometimes people are so blinded by their immediate desires they can't see the bigger picture," I responded. The woman who once defined herself solely as Arthur's wife and Amelia's mother had discovered a new multifaceted identity: a mentor, a successful businesswoman, and a fierce advocate for women. The envelope I'd discreetly handed Arthur at the restaurant hadn't merely served as my escape route. It had unlocked a door to a future I never even knew existed. Behind that door I found not just retribution, but a profound process of self-discovery and reinvention. In securing my financial independence, I had also reclaimed something far more precious: my own sense of self, my own agency, my own future.